Hey, what's up? This is James Tranke with Hex. We're based out of Heroes Collectible in Houston. I won the 2018 Fall Regional with OTT, and this is my deck profile along with some advice for the matchups in the meta. We're going to do this deck list a bit differently than the standard one you usually see. Vanguard deck building is fairly straightforward most of the time, especially in standard. Because of that, I'm going to list all of the cards that I think are staples. These are going to be in pretty much every single list you see, so I don't see the value of discussing them too much. I will just go over my personal choices that you don't see in every list and the reason why I decide to run them. We'll also be posting the full deck list plus the ratio in the comment below if you want to see the exact number. So to start off, we have our starter and triggers. Your triggers lineup should be 4 heal, 8 crit, 4 draw PGs. I do not think you'll see many people run more than 4 draw, as it is a little bit excessive and will probably cost you a deck out in the Protect Mirror. For grade 1, you will have Farfalle Magus and Circle Magus. These should be at least 3 of, preferably 4. For grade 2, you will want to run 4 Palmer Starter and at least 3 Yellow Witch Mimi. For grade 3, it will be 4 CEO Amaterasu for Imperial Daughter and at least 2 Victorious Deer. You might see some lists that run more, but I find 10 grade 3 to be a pretty good ratio. As for my personal choices, for grade 1, I run 2 Luck Bursts. These are actually very versatile. So for Soul Blast 2, they draw you a card and gain plus 6k to become 11k base. This allows you to call them on your grade 2 grind and generate some early game pressure by poking at Vanguard or Rearguard while maintaining a decent sized hand. If your opponent swing or retire it, that's completely fine because you already got value out of the card. Also, burst the wood. The second tech grade 1 that I run is 2 Goddess of Ties of Time, Mizunohame. If you have 3 or more cards in your damage zone, she is a 14k Vanguard booster. I mostly run this for the Force or XL matchup as she is kinda irrelevant in the Protect Mirror. When you run Imperial Daughter, she is 27k with a crit. You can then Soul Blast to give something else 6k, and I prefer to use a Soul Blast on the rearguard column and allow him to hit relevant number like 23 or 29. With this card boosting Imperial Daughter, it will hit 41. This is important because this is a very awkward number for your opponent to guard, as the only way to 2-pass this card with 2 cards is to guard it with 2 heal trigger, which will put their Vanguard at 52 or 53. The other obvious option is just to PG it, and Protect player will usually just PG it, but Force and XL player do not always have access to a PG or a double heal trigger in hand. So more often than not, you'll see you use 3 cards to guard your Vanguard due to the threat of a top deck crit trigger. It's just a really simple free 1 card advantage you gain every turn just by having her on the board. For grade 2, I'm running 2 of the promo Battle Sister Torte. This is a card that becomes 18k with crit if you have 10 or more cards in hand. This card is designed to be paired with the grade 1 promo that draw you 3 cards and discard 3 at the end of turn. I couldn't really find room to fit the grade 1, and I also found it to be pretty unnecessary. I was able to get Torte online about 4 to 5 times during the tournament, and it felt pretty good every time she went off. One particular example was against a Kagero player in top 8, where I wrote Amaterasu and top deck a draw trigger with her skill. Well, that allowed me to swing Vanguard my opponent for 25k, and my opponent 2 card guarded because he didn't want to go to 4 that early in the game. Well, then the Torte column with a booster became 36k with crit and forced another 2 card in my opponent's hand. So she turned what is normally a very low pressure turn into like a really solid play. Last but not least is 2 of Goddess of Insight Sotoorihime. I see a lot of people cutting this card from their list, and I don't agree with that. This card is fairly important in my opinion because of the XL matchup. XL are usually your hardest matchup, and the best way to deal with them is you just get to bait a defensive check and shut down the entire turn. She allows you to finish your fish for a defensive trigger, which is crucial for saving hand. And that's it for the deck list. Now let's move on to all the decks in the meta and how you should play versus each one. XL will be your most difficult matchup in the meta, mainly Aqua Force and Nova Grappler, since Tachikaze kinda function more like a Force deck. Even though a lot of people would rank Tachikaze among the best XL deck, that's currently out, I personally feel like they're the easiest for the OTT player due to them not attacking a lot and being fairly low pressure early game. They kind of don't really go off until they get onto Giga Rex, and even then they're only attacking you 4 times for a big number until pretty late into the game once they accumulate more Stealth Circle. Since you have access to constant PG, you kind of don't care about your big column, and Promise Daughter negate Dead Rex retire, so they don't really have a lot of strong play against you. Aqua Force and Nova, however, attack a lot more, so they're much harder to deal with. Plus, they have the ability to hit your 12k base Vanguard even if you hit a defensive check with at least 3 to 4 attacks still. So if you don't get a defensive trigger against these 2 decks, the game becomes really difficult. How I usually play against those decks is to try to guard efficiently early. If they ever swing with Vanguard early game without a booster, just take the free no pass and save yourself a damage. That damage could potentially be a life-saving trigger. So just swing at their most valuable rigor and play defensively. You don't need to push for high damage since they both have fairly low hand size and it's not difficult for you to kill them from 3 damage. Next is Force, which are Kagero, Sprite Brothers, Royal, and Shadow. So I think these are your easiest matchup with the sole exception of Kagero, which we'll go into last. Spikes, Royal, and Shadow will generally play the same way against you as they try to rush you early game. And this will occasionally win them game if they high roll and sack you a little bit early. It happens, it's Vanguard. I found that once you ride a grade 3, if you're at 3 damage or below, the game is fairly easy to control from that point. Of course, with that said, the sole exception being Kagero due to a card named Dragonic Waterfall. Now, Waterfall is a card that becomes increasingly difficult to guard, and usually the 3rd Waterfall turn is pretty much impossible to guard majority of the time. As the OTT player, you have a high degree of control over the game state due to having constant access to PG, and your Vanguard having crit pressure allowing you to manipulate the amount of damage you take and your amount of damage your opponent take. Well, Waterfall kinda make this really awkward by putting a clock on the game, forcing you to try to play more aggressively to win before they get there. Promise Daughter is really important for this matchup because it allows you to generate constant pressure by creating 23k column against the Kiro player and also completely negate the retire mechanic. So what they'll do is still usually try to poke at it. So if they do with a low pressure column, just trade 1 for 1 and keep the Promise Daughter. If they swing at it with a big column like 30k, just let them have it. The card did its job by absorbing a lot of pressure and giving you more time to fetch your win condition. Last is the Protect decks, Grand Blue, the OTT Mirror, and Mega Colony. Grand Blue is a fairly even matchup for you as it really just comes down to triggers. You're a bit favored due to how the mechanics function. It's pretty common for a Grand Blue player to mill 2 triggers and because of that have a much weaker turn. And OTT can fairly consistently top check for triggers to manipulate trigger into your advantage. So on the average game, you're just gonna naturally end up hitting more trigger than the Grand Blue player. It'll still be a really grindy matchup, but due to that reason, is fairly in your favor majority of the time. Next is the OTT Mirror, which is really simple in my opinion. I actually had to face 2 Mirror in the tournament, 1 in group and then 1 in top 8, and I won both of the Mirror due to deck out. So the most common mistake that you can see in this matchup is just by overplaying when you don't really need to. One of my opponent resolved 2 heal trigger early game and then proceeded to use multiple draw skill back to back without paying attention to his deck size. The thing about the OTT Mirror is that you're both even defensively and offensively, so it's really difficult for you to kill each other. Most of the time when you play this mirror, you're gonna end up going to deck out. So what is normally a good play in other matchup, it's potentially a really bad play in the OTT Mirror and will cost you to lose the game because of it. And I won both of the deck out by being ahead roughly about 3 cards. Last is the Mega Colony matchup, which I faced in the final. This is actually a really difficult matchup because of Sport Hercules, which is an insane card. It reduced the amount of pressure that you can generate by a lot, and it increased the amount of pressure your opponent generate on you by putting your Vanguard at 7k. It feels really bad if they ever resolve multiple turns with Spark Hercules. So how I play this matchup is trying to pressure my opponent early. I was fairly ahead in that game in the final, which due to triggers, which helped a lot. Otherwise, this matchup is actually really difficult. He was forced to use Counterblast to plus instead of saving for Spark, and you want to prevent them from using Spark quickly repeatedly as much as possible. And my opponent was able to get 2 turns of using Spark quickly thanks to Butterfly, but that's also was a -2 for him on board. You want to force them to do that as much as possible. After that point, though, I was able to constantly keep him at 1 Counterblast due to the crit pressure on Daughter, and I actually won of double crit Deer turn when he was at 4. So manipulating damage is a really important skill in Standard, as most decks do not have access to counter charge, so it's something that you should consider doing in matchup that you feel are unfavorable to just reduce the amount of pressure that your opponent can generate. And I actually feel like Mega Colony is probably the second best Protect deck in the game right now, and will be pretty favored against OTT when they get access to that new Grade 1 promo that just got revealed. It will give them constant unflip engine, which will swing the matchup in their favor. That covers all of the current deck in the meta. As for the future, we have AO4 coming out, Shadow Paladin has been covered, and even when they get full support, I don't think the deck is scary for OTT at all, since all you really need to do is draw a Promise Starter to shut down both of their Vanguard ability. It just become a grind game from that point. Dark Irregular has a very low pressure early game, and they're completely reliant on winning with the Dead Anchor Twin. This is really easy for you to guard because of the amount of PGs you have access to, and even their big anti-PG turn with Demon Eater is a one-shot, so all you have to do is save your guard for that. Unlike Waterfall, where you have to deal with it repeatedly, it's not very difficult at all. Mukuma and Pale Moon, however, are potentially both very bad matchups, as Mukuma has access to constant pressure early game, and they consistently maintain that pressure throughout the game to constant plussing. Plus they have cards like Musashi, which is really effective at reducing your hand size. Pale Moon is less consistent, but they have a higher threshold. Once they go off and hit all their combo pieces, they can get 9 attack off with just 2 counterblasts, and that's really scary to deal with, especially if you don't see a defensive check that turn. And even then, the +3 on Golden Beast Tamer allow them to just hit your defensive check 22k. And last but not least is Exculpate, who will give Royal Paladin a really strong play against you. On average, that turn for the Royal player represent a -8 to 10 cards against the OTT player, and that's just really difficult to come back from in the current state of Standard. With that said, I still think OTT is a really strong deck for at least the next 2-3 set, and should be something that you consider playing if you plan to top a tournament. So yeah, that's it guys. That is my deck profile. Once again, this is James Tranke with Hacks. Thank you for your time.